Alright, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Friday Ramblings. It's time to get going. It's time to ramble. It's time to go back to DC Comics and the incredible legacy of their Golden Age heroes, the Justice Society of America. This time we're going to discuss the gender bending, little g like this, God possessed occasionally and always golden blue dashing appearing Dr. Fate. That sounds like a lot to take in, but don't worry, we're going to make it very simple, even for those of you who have never read a comic book in your life and think this sounds really strange and complicated. Those old school comic book readers like myself know, of course, this is business as usual. First thing you have to know about Dr. Fate is a sorcerer, wizard, magician type character. Specifically, the various Dr. Fates are empowered by a connection to Nabu, one of the Lords of Order, who, as a group, tend to oppose the agents of the Lords of Chaos. Order, chaos. They have to exist in balance. When chaos tries to get up here, order has to go up here and knock them back down. And they often do this through various mortal agents, Dr. Fate being one of the primary ones of them. Nabu would occasionally serve as a voice in the head of active Dr. Fates, guiding them along, as well as, when push comes to shove, temporarily possessing the body of his mortal agent to make sure everything works out. So, what kind of Dr. Fates do we have? Well, that's where we get fun. The original Dr. Fate, Kent Nelson, is a Swedish-American who discovered the tomb of Nabu with his father. Having accidentally killed his father due to a deadly gas released from his tomb, the Lord of Order felt pity for the child and trained him in the ways of magic for 2 decades, bequeathing him his mystical amulet, helmet, and cloak, as well as all of his knowledge. Dr. Fate would then go out into the world and become a founding member of the Justice Society of America. Now, the helmet, amulet, and cloak are key because they are basically, as Dr. Fate became a legacy character and different mortals would take up the identity, it would all be linked to those items. The helmet and the amulet, a little more often than the cloak, but the cloak is part of the classic costume look. The helmet itself, being linked to Nabu, has, especially when there's a period where there is no mortal host, been known to change appearance and form. In the most obvious of cases, literally changing size to fit over the head of whoever is currently trying to be Dr. Fate, or even simply use it as a medium with which to contact Nabu. Occasionally the helmet, which is normally a full like thing, has taken on a half helmet look, more like a visor than a full helmet. But hey, it's not just artistic liberty, it is linked to the storylines of, as I said, being a direct connection to a Lord of Order. It has the ability to adapt to what the current user needs. Kent Nelson would serve as the longest Dr. Fate, and during his tenure as the Doctor, as opposed to the Doctor of Doctor Who, but as opposed to Dr. Fate, during his time serving as Dr. Fate, Kent Nelson would meet the woman Inza Kramer. Make sure I got the right in the last name there, folks. But Inza Kramer, who he would eventually marry, leading her to become Inza Nelson. They would often reside in between missions in the Tower of Fate, a tower directly connected to the magic of both Fate and Nabu that, although it has traditionally at any one given time a single entrance from the mortal world, you can exit it in various points around the world, and within the tower time flows differently, as well as especially if you are somebody who is currently trespassing, more like an entire dimension that occasionally likes to defy the laws of classic physics. Meaning, basically, if you trespass in there, you will most likely never escape again because you will never be able to find the door. Or even, sometimes, a floor to put your feet on. Little hint. Don't go into the Tower of Fate if you're not an invited guest. Still, over time, Kent Nelson would eventually find himself winding down his superhero career, and it temporarily reaching a tragic end when, along with Inza, he is killed by the Lords of Chaos during an event in which they took advantage of their ascended power. Kent and Inza would later be reincarnated in new mortal bodies and continue to serve as Dr. Fate before succumbing to the events of 0 Hour, where they were aged to the point where they could not physically play superheroes anymore, and the pair retired shortly thereafter, dying, although their spirits would continue to serve later Dr. Fate incarnations as extra advisors. Now, I'm going to skip a little bit over Dr. Fates 2 and 3. We're going to go back to them. However, it should be noted before their final retirement in 0 Hour, for a period, Inza Nelson did actually serve as the solo Dr. Fate during a period where Kent was unable to serve as host of Nabu. Thus, as I teased before, we have had occasional female hosts. This was a particularly interesting period because in the early days of Kent Nelson's marriage, Inza would actually resent Nabu and Kent Nelson's role as Nabu's primary agent due to how often it would take them away from any sort of normal social life and ability to have friends outside of teammates in the Justice Society, which were more Kent's friends than Inza's. She kind of had that very real world issue of being a spouse of somebody that's works full time and is on call at all times. The whole doctor police thing. And so having her serve as host was an interesting twist, since she was not exactly somebody very enamored with Nabu and the role of Fate. However, she served in good stead, often being a more proactive, aggressive Fate than Kent. Still, as I said, they both were eventually aged to their proper age after using magic to slow their aging process for decades. And they would retire happily as spirits in a corner of the afterlife connected to the amulet itself. This would factor into stories featuring later Dr. Fates in the modern stories. But we do have Doctors 2 and 3 to cover. In 1987, new host Eric Strauss debuted, created by DeMatteis and Keith Giffen, who were pretty much all over DC in the 80s. Now, Eric Strauss was the child of wealthy billionaire Henry Strauss and Rebecca Strauss, and was picked basically from birth as the destined next agent of the Lord of Order. During a period where Kent was still actively serving, Eric would in turn be chosen at the age of 10, physically aged, so that he could deal with the physical strain of being a superhero and channeling the great magic powers of Dr. Fate. However, his mind was not given a chance to mature like Kent Nelson's was, creating an interesting dynamic. However, it should be said that due to him having been a chosen Lord of Order from the get-go, he tended to have a personality that was a little mature for his age, so it wasn't a complete total, child running around as an adult issue. Still, he did not have the pure wisdom of Kent Nelson. However, there was a compromise made when his stepmother, Linda Strauss, served as basically a secondary persona within Dr. Fate, occasionally merging with Eric to create kind of a 2-in-1 Dr. Fate. This would create some interesting dynamics because depending on which one of their personalities was dominant, depended on the physical gender Dr. Fate appeared to show as. Again, a lot of magic being thrown around here. And the subsequent really awkward part, because it's the late 80s, what do you want here, folks? Where, due to Eric's mind still being that of a highly advanced 10-year-old, but still emotionally 10-year-old, Eric and Linda would, due to their extremely close bond, grow to have romantic feelings of a sort for each other. I'm just going to repeat this one more time, and then we're going to move past it, because as I said, this was one of those things where we just go, okay, a lot of weird stuff was being done in comics at the time. An adult woman. Well, occasionally being physically merged with her child, with her 10-year-old stepson, who was given the physical body of an adult male, developed romantic feelings for him that he reciprocated, even though he did not technically have the emotional and mental abilities to really comprehend what that reciprocation meant. And we're moving on because we really don't want to dwell on this too much. Eric is eventually killed on Apocalypse during a battle with Desaad, one of Darkseid's top minions, forcing Linda to become Dr. Fate on her own for a period of a few years. During this time, she would become a member of the Justice League International. Linda is soon afterwards killed by the Lords of Chaos. And Eric and Linda's souls were reincarnated in the bodies of Eugene and Wendy DeBellia, so they could basically just be normal people, having finished their tenure as Nabu's agent. So where do we go from here? Well, we do go with that 0 hour thing we mentioned before. Now, one of the things you have to understand about 0 hour is it occurred in the early 90s and led into the mid-90s, which was awkward for comic books all around and, well, frankly, most of society. That's right, folks, we are pushing into the mid-90s, the era of dark, gritty, edgelord heroes. Not! We lived through it. We survived. and hopefully we learned a little better. At least some of us did. Looking at you people that are like in your 40s and still obsessing about Punisher. Get over yourself! Even though, yes, I know technically Punisher debuted well before that, it was during this period where he got his biggest peak in popularity. So with this big cultural shift being reflected in comic books, Dr. Fate got his little post-Zero Hour edgelord makeover with another host. This time we dropped the Doctor. He just used the codename Fate. Ladies and gentlemen, Jared Stevens. Debuted in 1994, created by John Francis Moore and Anthony Williams. Supposed to be a traditional sorcerer and spellcaster, he's instead a demon hunter and mercenary, and is considered as appropriate, given what he was, just about the most universally agreed upon worst Dr. Fate ever. Again, he didn't even use the Doctor in his title. Between retiring and dying of old age, the Nelsons hired smuggler Jared Stevens to recover the helmet, amulet, and cloak of Fate from an Egyptian tomb. When the Nelsons tried to collect the artifacts, they were murdered by 2 demons. Okay, oops, sorry, I guess that wasn't natural age. This is what I get for not double-checking my notes before recording. So yes, Kent and Insa are murdered by demons. During battle, Jared attempts to use the amulet as a weapon, which explodes and imbues him with various magical abilities, and a red Ankh-shaped scar over his right eye. Jared's injuries force him to use the cloak as a wrap for his right arm, and to melt the helmet into a set of Ankh-shaped darts and a dagger for use as weapons. Jared is later contacted by Nabu, who attempts to make Jared the new Dr. Fate. Jared refuses the responsibility, becoming a demon hunter using the simple alias of Fate. He would team up with various other mystic-based heroes and demonstrated the one decent aspect of recasting the helmet into a set of throwing daggers is that being still imbued by the power of a Lord of Order, even if he throws blind and in desperation, the daggers never miss, as in they will bounce off of 1,000 different objects if they have to, correct their angle and trajectory, and will, given enough time, stab the intended target. Jared's arm, having also, the one he wrapped up in the cloak, having also been injured in a demonic mystical battle, would carry a bit of a curse itself, one that Jared was always hesitant to utilize. Eventually, Jared is later murdered by Mordru, an agent of the Lords of Chaos, who wanted to claim Fate's artifact for himself. Jared's equipment reverts to its original forms and returns to the Tower of Fate upon his death. Nobody really missed Jared. All of this leads up to the Modern Justice Society of America book. In fact, Jared's death is one of the first story arcs in the modern JSA era. Part of this plotline is that Hector Hall, who you may remember from our Infinity Inc. videos, was previously known as the Silver Scarab, and had, due to being possessed by a not exactly nice and sane deity himself, eventually went crazy and sacrificed his life to save his love and their child. Who would have a destiny of his own. That's another story for another time, though. Hector Hall would find himself being reincarnated as the biological son of Hawk and Dove, a team in which each one of them is an agent of chaos and order, working together, personifying the balance that the universe intends chaos and order to remain in. This meant that due to his biological connection to both the sides of chaos and order, Hector Hall is now an agent of balance instead of simply serving the side of order. Hector Hall would serve with the Justice Society as both a magical advisor and active hero on the team, while occasionally struggling to live up to the legacy of the Nelsons, and to a lesser extent the Strausses, and, well, nobody wants to live up to the legacy of Jared Stevens. He was a jerk. Unfortunately, Hector Hall's time would be brief-lived compared to Kent Nelson due to the fact that, as part of the Infinite Crisis events, the Spectre goes on a quest to extinguish magic and banishes Hector and his wife to a little, basically it's an alternate pocket dimension. They were trapped on what was the top of a snow-covered mountain for all intents and purposes, and would have to fight off various creatures until they were simply physically exhausted. Nothing to eat, nothing to drink, no ability to actually sleep. They would either, they would unfortunately be killed via slow torment and torture because, again, Spectre was a little crazy at this point, and even at his best, he was a vindictive prick. But we're going to discuss the Spectre another time. However, they did get a happy ending due to the fact that their son, who, as I said, is another story for another time, long story short, used his abilities to bring them into a much cheerier dimension where they could live as a family, happy for eternity. However, the process means that since this dimension is not one of physical bodies, they are unable to leave this dimension and ever return to Earth, even for brief visits, so ultimately Spectre got what he wanted and killed them. This leads us to the back half of the Modern Justice Society era, the last couple years of the series, as we got Kent V. Nelson, a psychiatrist and grandnephew of the original Kent Nelson, who, previous to becoming Dr. Fate, would suffer various personal and professional setbacks, putting him at a point in his life where he had nothing left. It was at this era of his life that the Helmet of Fate came into his possession, and recognizing it and realizing he had a biological initiative to his destiny, fully embraced being Fate, although due to the fact that Nabu had been weakened by the Spectre's previous assault on all things magic, and his classic wisdom-giving ability was at a bare minimum, this Fate was not seen as powerful as some of his predecessors, having to do much more learning on the job than most of them. His tenure would be ended by the New 52 reboot, which is where we stop thinking about DC Comics because we try to be positive here. Although it is important to note that, for the record, New 52 would introduce a brand new Dr. Fate host. I'm just going to mention this real quick in passing, of Khalid Nassour, as well as bringing back Kent Nelson in a certain form and fashion. But we don't talk about this stuff because it's New 52, and forget that noise. So there you go, folks. we have several hosts, 2 of which were females, a couple of which were not properly trained and primed for the job, some of which had connections to the greater concept of the Lords of Orders and Chaos, and various other heroic legacies. Remembering, of course, as I said from our Infinity Inc. video, that Hector Hall, besides being the Silver Scarab in his own right, was the child of the Golden Age Hawkman and Hawkgirl, who got their own video induction as part of our breakdown of all things Awesome Justice Society. So many legacies tying together, because that's what Justice Society did great throughout the eras, was keep the legacies tied together and supported and awesome. And we have one edgelord we don't like to talk about. We're just going to call Jared Stevens Bruno from now on, because we don't talk about Bruno. Ooh, Disney reference. That one's for those of you who were nice enough to sit through all of this. You get a Disney reference. You even get a modern day one. I'm not going to show my age on that one. So, on behalf of all the Dr. Fates, we appreciate you watching. Next month we're going to cover some more Justice Society Legacy, because there's a couple more members we got to go through before we close out our salute to not just the Golden Age of DC and how they created such brilliant characters that the superhero concepts would blatantly survive, even if the specific person did not occasionally. But more importantly, that within the own Justice Society books, as they have been revived over the years, the legacies were treated as a thing of honor, not obligation. So, consider it an honor to come back in 7 and hear another rambling, and in a few more past that, we'll continue discussing DC superheroes. Yay. And if you're good, you might get another Disney reference. But I promise not to talk about Bruno anymore. Even the guy we called Bruno, because he was a 90s edgelord. And that's even worse than what Encanto gave us. Bye-bye, folks. Love and appreciation to all.